Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to bring this topic by Lloyd to you. Today, we are going to be discussing how to optimize your portfolio with resource planning, something that if you are familiar with Prosymmetry, you know that this is a topic we are very, very passionate about. Um, so before we get started here, a few housekeeping items, of course. Um, First, this webinar will be available on demand via a recording. You will also be sent the slides from today's presentation as well. That email will go out to people who both have attended and have not attended, probably tomorrow, maybe Monday, just depending on, when we get that video live. Um, you are more than welcome to share that with anyone else. This will be available on our website too, on our YouTube channel. We want to make sure you have all of the information. Additionally, we do have 2 more webinars coming up in this Q1 webinar series. In about 2 weeks, we will have a conversation on scaling resource management, which is all about specifically moving from Excel to a resource management platform like Tempus Resource, of course. And then in about a month, we will be having another conversation just about capacity planning overall, really how to get started with it, best practices, some tips and tricks on, how to really move the needle with capacity planning at your organization. So before we get started, I want to give a few polls here. First one is a question. Is capacity planning part of your initial portfolio planning process at the enterprise level? So if you all could, if you navigate over to your webinar screen, we'll give just about a minute here to respond to this. And I guess while we're waiting as well, Lloyd is on the call. He will be doing the presentation. Hi, Lloyd. How are you?
Hi, very good to be joining you all today.
Yeah, this question, Lloyd and I were talking before we went live today on just it's really important to understand, where our attendees are with this process. It really helps us kind of, frame the conversation, and just really interesting to see as well. Awesome. We have a majority who's voted. We'll give it just a few more seconds here, about 10 more seconds. Okay, we have, yes is winning right now. So that's exciting, Lloyd. We have now tied for yes. We have we're trying, a few not sure. So this is really promising. Okay, love this.
Good, good.
All right, I'm going to end this poll. And we have one more for you today. And this is going to be, how often do you continue to coordinate capacity for your portfolio at the enterprise level? So, for those of you who said that you're trying or you're doing it annually, or I'm sorry, yeah, you are doing it. Are you doing it only at the initial planning? Are you revisiting that capacity plan for your portfolio every 6 months, monthly, quarterly? Or not at all. So really interested to see this answer too. All right. Okay, so we're getting a couple every 6 months. We get monthly, quite a few nevers, which could be, people who just don't do it in the first place. That's perfectly fine. All right. We have one for initial planning only. Okay, so Lloyd, we got quite a few people in here. Initial planning only, every 6 months, monthly. So this is really exciting, because I know this is something we're very passionate about. So awesome, great to see. Okay, and we are going to end this poll as well. Awesome. Thank you for participating, everyone. This is super exciting to see. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Lloyd now that we know more about you, and hopefully you find some really good value in today's presentation. With that said, Lloyd, over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. Appreciate it. And thank you all for participating in that poll. It only takes a couple of minutes, but it is really interesting. I have the opportunity to visit with organizations really all over the world, on a routine basis. And there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, right? So it's helpful to get a baseline sort of where you are. And we're going to be talking about best practices today. And I want to remind you that, and here's just some of the organizations that we work with. This truly is just a fraction of them. Um, what we're going to be talking about today are principles and best practices for portfolio management. It's critical that you use the right automation for that. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that a little bit today as well, but really focused on portfolio life cycle planning. Hence the question from Samantha first thing this morning. And understand, please, that the principles that we're talking about today are really applicable across industry. We have organizations that are product organizations, some that are pure IT delivery organizations. They might be delivering waterfall, agile, predominantly both is what we're seeing now. Even Gartner, the large consulting firm, indicates that the majority of their clients now are and plan to in the future deliver via mixed methodology, meaning both waterfall and hybrid. And so, it doesn't matter which methodology you're using. The principles today are actually being practiced by some of the best companies in the world, and we're going to dive into how you might be able to take some of those practices and apply them to your organization. Right? The concept that we really want to drive home here is this idea of continuously optimizing value delivery through your portfolio. This is just a sample portfolio I threw out here. And the notion being, look, the reason that we have audits, products, epics, whatever they are in your portfolio, is that ostensibly they're adding value to your enterprise whenever you deliver them. Hopefully you're adding value incrementally along the way, but it's typical for the primary amount of value to come near the end of or delivery of either an epic or a project. The goal being, we want to drive all of this to the left. To the extent possible, we need to look at an enterprise level, not just at an organization level, and say, what can we do to drive the most value into this year or into this quarter, right? And the challenge is, of course, while you're doing this at an enterprise level, others are trying to do this at a program level, a portfolio level, a product level, if you will, while they are wanting to expand the work that's in this overall portfolio, which ostensibly has its own value proposition, right? So the challenge is, how do you do that? And our proposition today is that you've got to look at all the constraints, right? But predominantly, it's the availability of skilled peoples and teams that constrain delivery. If you're familiar with the now decades-old book, Theory of Constraints, the author talks about you want to go after essentially that which constrains your delivery the most. What is the primary bottleneck? And then work out from there. All of us know that obviously you're not going to be you're going to be looking to make the best of your financial situation. Typically, portfolios get block funded, and then that funding gets split out by, like, say, product or sub portfolio or program. So you've got to be cognizant of that, and especially if your CFO is giving you certain capex constraints, those sorts of things. So there's other guardrails that we need to look at, and they're important. But what really gates execution delivery is the availability of teams and people. And if you don't believe that, I would just ask you to close your eyes and ponder for just a second. Well, what is it that gates my delivery? Once I'm funded, I immediately need to go out and get resources. And I either have them or I don't. And I either have enough lead time to rearrange my work in a way that I can get it done with my own people, or I've got to start talking about bringing in contingent labor. So let's talk about how we can make this happen easily. Now, a couple of things I want to mention relative to life cycle planning is it isn't just me that say, heck, I work with Tempus Resource, right? But frankly, I've been doing portfolio for longer than probably I would be willing to admit. And yep, I'll tell you, it's always resources that constrain delivery. But some of the brightest minds in the industry, outside of my own, people from PMI, people from Scaled Agile Inc., people that have really thoughtfully put frameworks together to say, how should we be doing portfolio flow? And frankly, this came right off the Scale the Agile Link website, right? This is their concept of portfolio flow here. And look, long before they get to the point where they're sequencing work in their portfolio, they're doing preliminary estimates. WSJF, if you're familiar with that, it's weighted shortest job first. Well, how can you ever find out what the duration is, the denominator of that equation, if you will, if you don't know if you have people available to do it? If you've only got one person and you have 10 people's worth of work, it's going to take 10 times longer. And it's why they specifically call this out if you go read this article. And you'll have this, as Samantha said, we're going to be handing these out to you. You're welcome to go look at this. But they say, look, you've got to account for capacity allocation when you're doing your prioritization. And that is my point here. I've got another slide following this that kind of clarifies this even more. But look throughout the life cycle of delivery, even when you're implementing, it's all about capacity coordination. Now, of course, they've got a series of your routine planning events that they would have you involved in. But PMI essentially says the same thing. And I want to make sure we've got time for questions after this, but I would encourage you to go out there and look at this. It's really more of a flow diagram, if you will, talking about their program groups, but it says the same thing. You need to be doing more detailed capacity planning long before you get to prioritization, if you will, and certainly when you continue to groom your backlog. So if those are best practices, then I would sort of ask rhetorically, why do we see this? I see this all the time when I consult with organizations. I've worked in organizations where this is sort of the standard practice, which is, when we're talking about putting together our annual roadmap, or even at a 6-month basis, you got to have a vision, right? I'm down for that struggle. But as you go through this process, you need to be incorporating capacity far earlier here, because frankly, by the time you get here, you're reacting. I remember consulting with a large financial institution, and they would come up with this all the time. And they were talking to me about how for 3 years in a row, their CFO wandered into the PMO and said, you guys are dramatically missing now for the 3rd year in a row, your CapEx targets. And as we had this discussion, it was because they were essentially committing to a whole bunch of work without ever doing the proper level of capacity planning. They were great. Hey, this is a financial institution. They're happy to tell you, if you can qualify, this effort financially or even technically, but never really properly pulled capacity planning into the front end of that. So let's talk about how that happens. In the first place, I would say the reason that people are challenged with this is because it's complex. I mean, this particular slide is intentionally complex, but it reflects reality for many of our IT delivery organizations that we support. They've got epics, they've got projects, and a backlog here. And the epics, they're typically being supported by delivery from teams, but these teams are using tools like Jira or ADO, which are wonderful agile work decomposition development tools. They're not designed and never have been to do enterprise level capacity planning, right? Then if you throw projects on top of that, well, they're probably planning on a different cadence, but just like the epics, right? The epic owners and the project managers, the product owners, they're all competing for shared services, internal partners like compliance, audit, regulatory, legal. And then when you start to try to plan these folks on a common timeline, you run into this issue. If you're getting estimates from your business partners, they're going to tell you, yep, I'll give you a person for 3 weeks. Or if you go to shared services, they're going to tell you that's probably a 200 to 300 hour estimate, or I'll give you 50% of a cybersecurity engineer for 6 months because that's about the size we think that is. And then when you start trying to coordinate teams, well, we get into that age-old discussion about how do you normalize velocity across teams. I love this quote from Steve Jobs about complexity. What we're going to talk about today is how we've conquered this complexity. There's actually value in doing this. The reason people don't do it is because their software doesn't allow them to do it, because it's designed to work at a team level, or it's too complex because they're trying to put people on tasks in some large monolithic PPM tool. And so they just avoid it. Or they, better yet, come up with a plan that says, no, we should never do this. We should just be doing this quarterly at a team-based level, right? Look, quarterly team-based planning is wildly important, especially pulling the business into that, right? To making sure that you're understanding their priorities. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking a holistic look as well. And so we've embraced both of that. We're going to talk about that. So the concept that we believe is best practice, and it is best practice, as outlined again by some of the best thought leadership out there relative to resource planning. Again, I'll reference PMI, Scaled Agile Inc., the Resource Management Institute. When you're delivering software, and by the way, this is true even if you're on this call and you're not necessarily working in a technology perspective. Product organizations have this same kind of issue, just with different software, so to speak. But people, if you're working in Jira or ADO or whatever your PPM tool may be, you're typically pretty good over here in terms of going out roughly 90 days and committing to work and making sure things are going there. Don't get me wrong, there's problems here, things come up all the time, right? But generally speaking, these fixed forecasts are good. The challenge that you run into is if you're not going out here and starting with higher level estimates of capacity at a team and role level, you're just saying, hey, this is large, extra large, right? Look, I'm glad you're starting there, but what we're proposing here and what I'm asking is, please consider taking it down just one notch. Just do the same thing by team and by role. It will open up a whole world of coordination for you and risk mitigation that otherwise you'll never see here. How many times have you gone into a quarterly planning event and you feel like you know what you want to do, your product managers or whatever are telling you, yeah, this is our priority, but the people are already committed, right? Specialized skills, again, DBAs, cybersecurity engineers, compliance. I recently was working with a client where compliance pushed a project out 6 months, and it's because they weren't well coordinated in advance. And so your teams, and here's the dichotomy. If you go talk to people on your teams, oh, they're adamant. They're going to tell you, we're absolutely working on the highest priority item. We've prioritized our backlog, and we're just pulling those things, and we are blowing and going, and we are all that in a bag of chips, right? And they're right from their level, but what they don't know is that the level above them has already had to push the highest priority work because the critical resources that were needed to deliver minimum marketable features aren't available, right? So from their perspective, they're doing it right. They're doing the best they can. But we're talking about optimizing things at an enterprise portfolio level, right? So please consider what we're going to show here over the next couple of minutes. And it really does come down to making sure that you are doing the right level of planning at the right time at a team role level. So let me walk through this real quick. So typically people, when they're building out a product roadmap, they start by shirt sizing. It's a best practice, right? All I'm saying is please consider doing that by team and role. Instead of saying the whole project itself needs 120 people, say, you know what we need? We need probably about 10 people that can do concrete. We probably need about another 20 people that can do framing for us. Then we need, 15 roofers. Then we need 5 plumbers, right? Just break it down one more level. It's not that much work, especially if you have the right automation. This is how you really determine if projects are feasible or not. When we start doing this, and I've held hundreds of planning meetings like this, and roughly 10 to 15% of the time when I come out of these meetings, projects are essentially terminated on the spot before they ever started, to which people routinely thank me. It's like, wow, that would have taken us 6 months and a ton of wasted time to kill those projects. And it's because we're doing it at a team role level and we're getting a more accurate view of what's going on. And we can do that in an hour. I promise you, you can generally do that in an hour. The next step is to simply refine those team role estimates. Instead of doing it at a project level, you do it by month, right? And this is really the level that you need to get to if you want to seek approval. It's entirely appropriate to be able to walk into an approval meeting with a reasonable estimate of when can we actually do this work. Otherwise, the sponsor's assuming that you're going to start it tomorrow, right? It's okay to approve things and not start it for 4 months. You just need to set the right expectation. And I'm telling you, if you're not doing this by team and role, then you got no data to say, hey, we have to push this because this group or this group's not ready until that time. And look at what they're working on. It is, in fact, higher priority. Then, of course, you get down to the task level if you're talking projects, story level if you're talking epics, and that's where you're doing capacity by week and day, right? And that's all well and good. You're doing that typically on a quarterly basis. What we see is that people typically that are doing this in a tool like Jira or ADO, that's great, right? They're good at doing this at a team level, but it's easy for them to coordinate back up to the feature level at a capacity level during their routine planning events. So it's very straightforward. These are best practices. Again, the thing that we see that helps the most is to make sure that you're doing this by team and role at every planning level. What we recommend is something we call the smart life cycle. We've got technology that easily lets you size your work. I'll show you this in just a minute. You can take teams of entirely different velocities from different parts of your organization and put them on a common timeline, even though one team might have a velocity of 80 story points every 2 weeks, another might have a velocity of 25 story points, right? The same 2 weeks. We do all that normalization behind the scenes for you. It's very clever, unique IP for us, and it really simplifies things. And you do all that in an Excel-like interface, extremely easy for people to do this. We offer very easy modeling. I'm going to show you this as well, where you can, in a digital twin of your portfolio, in about 10 minutes, come in here and say, what happens if I introduce new work into my portfolio? And it'll see here, you'll see it just radiating. Here's the groups you're going to blow away. Let's work on timing, and you can interactively design this and say, hey, let's actually design our flow, right? You can do this at the start of the year at an annual basis. You can do this ad hoc anytime you get new regulatory work walking in the door. Say, what should we push, right? Once you get executive approval to essentially sequence your work during, at this level, then all you do is you align your roadmap to that. When you align your roadmap to that, look, your roadmap is what you are becoming, right? Russell M. Nelson, famous heart surgeon, theologian, says, essentially what we are becoming is more important than what we're doing. And I advocate that from a portfolio perspective as well. Your roadmap is where you're going. It's how you're transforming your business. So you should be able to reserve capacity reasonably, even if you're setting aside part of that capacity for decisions being made at a local level by product management, right? That's how this works. It's a continuous process. And I'll show you this as well. Transparently, over the course of the lifetime of your portfolio being executed, you should always be able to see, how are my people aligned? How are my teams aligned? How are they aligned to my strategy, right? Or OKRs, or any other portfolio planning element that you want. And if somebody pushes out work because of some legitimate business reason, look, this development effort just is taking about 6 weeks longer than we thought. As soon as you do that, everybody that wants or that has skin in the game gets notified of that, right? Your teams are down here. They're doing their thing, right? We advocate letting them continue to work in the same tools that they're using. Look, we have a lot of people that use our scheduling tools and stuff for that, and that's great. But if you have your own, that's great also. But what you must do on a regular basis is make sure that this process up here is ongoing and parallel to what's happening down at your team delivery. All right. So again, I talked about how important it is to make sure that you get your teams of different velocities on a common timeline with generic resources, with named resources, and you can go back and forth between story points, hours, cost, all on an Excel interface. You've got to make this easy, easy, easy for people. The trick is you got to make sure that you're unified in a simple process. note this: Excel, 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 right? If you've got people doing agile, they're not doing longer term planning in these tools. It's too difficult. They were never designed to be doing that. So if they're doing it at all, which they probably aren't because they're deferring to doing it at a team level, they are doing it in Excel, right? I have some that are doing this. Bumped into an organization that has 500 agile teams, and they're having to go out 18 months in order to make sure that they're ready for their quarterly planning events, right? And the agile coach that I was talking to there, very sharp chap. He's like, look, if we don't do that, we just get clobbered. We end up pushing high priority work if we don't. Waterfall projects, an interesting study that was released by the Resource Management Institute just recently. They went out and polled 2,000 organizations that already have a PPM tool and asked them one question: what are you using to do resource capacity planning? 75% of them came back and said, we're doing that in Excel. Isn't that interesting, right? And I would guess the other 25% probably aren't doing it at all. Because the challenge is, look, unless you've done a detailed work breakdown structure, you're not going to be able to put people on task, which is how PPM tools typically ask you to do that, right? And so, you've got to have an easy to use coordinated way to do capacity planning. Your ops work, they're always doing this Excel, right? These are the guys with the beautiful Excel spreadsheets that, everybody envies here. But it really is a staffing drill. So you want to make sure that you're unifying this and everybody can see what everybody else is doing in one location. All right, it's easy and effective, and it benefits everyone in the enterprise. This is not a heavy ask that we're talking about here. This is truly an order of magnitude or more easier than adopting, say, a heavy framework for Agile at scale, or an 18 to 24 month PPM tool integration. We're talking 1 to 2 planning hours a month to get up and implement the kind of technology that is now easy enough to let you manage this complexity. It's a matter of weeks instead of months or years, right? And as it happens, many of the organizations that are committed to adopting these larger frameworks, they have to do this anyway, right? Because the traditional tool sets that are used to deliver agile work decomposition don't do this. So please keep that in mind. So let me pause here and say, let me show you this one last thing too. This is just an example of I took this right out of one of our case studies from one of the organizations that have done this. And again, this goes back to sort of my opening salvo, which is over the life cycle of your portfolio. When you prioritize, look, they're doing resource planning. As they're doing more detailed planning, they're getting final resource commitments. As they monitor and deliver, it's a constant review of resource scheduling. And so this came right out of their slide deck, hence the colors are so different from my own, right? I just pulled it and popped it in at the last minute here. But it's just an example of what people are doing to incorporate life cycle resource capacity planning and the benefits that they are getting from it. All right, let me pop out here real quick and show you a couple of things. You've got a list of projects here. Let me just pop into one. Again, you'll see here right away where you've got teams, totally different velocities, mapped out here on a common timeline. You can look at this by percentage of team, the costs come along for the ride. You can look at this by hours. So what that means is, I can come in here and essentially drag and drop this, just like, using Excel, right? Super easy to do this. And then this gets rolled up at a portfolio level. And now you can see across all products, all organizations. You can organize this however you would like. Let's go into manufacturing. In fact, I'll just open all these. This is across your whole enterprise. And so you can say, look in the regulatory and risk product area, here's every project that I have, and here's the allocations of people. And if they're red, it means that they're over allocated. So you should be asking yourself, why do I have that risk in my organization? And so you can immediately go in and look at a person, like Sebastian, if you will, and say, what else are they working on, right? This is this is the fabled transparency that consulting organizations are telling you that you have to have, and it always comes down to transparency of what what I need to see is where my skilled people are and who else with those skills is possibly available that I can push onto this project. And that just comes along for the ride, right? So you can see here the other efforts that this individual is working on, right, during that time frame, all well and good, right? So let's let's just remember that all we've asked of your people is to do what industry thought leaders are saying already is a best practice. Just come in and essentially size your work. And we don't care if you size it by FTE, by percentage, by story points, if you're talking teams, right? We allow you to do that. And it's very easy for us to help you set this up. You essentially just go out and you enter your people. We typically bulk upload this for people through an Excel spreadsheet. So you've got people with capacity, they've got skills, and they're associated with an organization. How easy is that? Then you put in your projects, right? These high level sizings, also very easy. And then all of this comes along for the ride. Look, you can look at this in terms of any way that you have your projects attributed. I can come in here and say, what are the efforts that are driving my cost reduction goals for the year, right? And again, I should be asking myself, why is there any red out here, right? And you can see this at a reasonable level months in advance if you're doing your estimates by team and by role. Now, another thing that we offer that people love is this whole concept of being able to model. This is simply a digital twin of your portfolio. Everybody gets this. This comes packaged with our software because we consider it vital into the portfolio planning process. But again, as soon as you size your work, it unlocks these capabilities, and you can see by team and by role, all up and down, anybody that's red is overallocated during that period. You can look at this by day, week, month, year, 10-year views, right? You also get to see the financial view of this, right? From a budget perspective, I can look at this annually. If I'm pushing work out, am I going to be pushing CapEx into the next year? It's just super easy to do. I don't want to say it's like a video game, but it's a little like a video game, right? You can come out here and say, hey, what's driving this over allocation? I can see my work. I can see what the priority is. Let's go take Quicksilver 7. If I slide that out, look in real time, you saw that moved in here. I'll show you. Let's go look at everything that's changed here. Look at all the roles before and after, right? So this is what's happening. These are the other projects that I'm possibly going to be colliding with, as I do this. And you don't have to do this in an uninformed way because we're importing, right, your percentage complete. Am I still keeping up with my my value metrics, right? Where do I rank? Very easy to set these up. These take about 10 minutes to set up. And anybody that wants one can use one, right? We're all about full unmitigated transparency across the organization. And if you look up top, you say, well, all the blue ones are those that are approved. These can be epics projects side by side, right? Feature stories if you want. But I have new work here that I want to introduce into this portfolio. We'll clear out the adjustments that we already made and say, hey, what happens if I bring a project like Iron Gate 5 in, right? What happens to my portfolio if I want to, include this? Where can I start it? The opportunity map will lay out dates based on the resources that you need, right? Here's all the people and the teams that I've said that I need for this work. Well, if I don't need those specific named people, but I just need their role, right, their skill set, I can push that work up by at least a month, right? And then it'll tell you again, you've got these people available, right? And if I can get by with even less resource, then I can possibly even push that up even farther, right? So the last thing that I'll say is, again, what you are becoming is more important than what you're doing. Although you need to be able to track and report on both. All of this, right? Uh, this ability to see across your portfolio at a capacity level. It's like a portfolio PET scan. If you're familiar with a PET scan, PET, right? You go in there and they'll tell you they take this scan of your body. It's wonderful technology, and they'll show you everywhere that you've got a risk potentially of cancer or something else that you don't want to have happen, right? We're exactly the same way, right? These are all risks that you should be mitigating, right? And so we take those and report them up, into beautiful dashboards. You can see your things like your future flow, right? What's in my pipeline? The how is my pipeline reliably going to be spread from a cost perspective across my strategic themes, my spend across portfolios, my planning horizons, by work type. Uh, you can do plan versus actual, right? All of this in beautiful dashboards because the data feeds this. So it's a really, really effective way to manage a portfolio. I would encourage you all to, if you'd like to continue this conversation, I'm gonna sort of wind it down here. I wanted to leave time to take some questions, and hopefully, if obviously, if you've got questions, hopefully you're putting them in the chat, and I'll ask Samantha to pipe in here in just a minute. But please reach out to us. We do free trials. Years ago, a decade ago, when I brought this in to an organization I was working with, I actually brought it in and came acquainted with Prosymmetry through a trial. I did a 60-day trial, and by the end of 60 days, we had easily set up a model, felt confident in our answers, and walked into the CIO and said, we've got issues here. And it started us off on a whole journey of rethinking how we do our portfolio level prioritization and design. So free trials are available if you want them. Come out here. There's a zillion case study, well-known companies, right? Where you're able to see more intimate information from them about the value proposition that they've gotten by doing this. But again, this works kind of in closing. This is not mutually exclusive relative to your existing PPM tools, certainly not your existing agile tools. It's actually a prerequisite for putting together larger frameworks, things like agile at scale, those sorts of things. And so please reach out to us if you'd like to continue this discussion. Appreciate the opportunity to present. Samantha, if I may, let me turn the call back over to you.
Yeah.
I haven't been watching the chat session at all, so if we've got questions, let's dive in.
Excuse me. Yes, and that was actually something I forgot to mention at the beginning. If you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat. Lloyd, you know that I love to ask this question at the end of every session. What is it going to take to get started to do this? So we did have a few people say that they are not doing this, or maybe they're trying to do it. How would you get started really implementing this process? Where would you start?
So, look, I'll give you sort of the trite answer with a little bit of follow-up. It almost doesn't matter where you start. I've worked with, I've implemented this in a lot of different organizations, right? And we typically see it starting in a couple of places, either on a project by project basis. The PMs, they're asked to start doing this, right? Here's the thing too, this is rarely an incremental ask. People are typically trying to do something like this in Excel already, right? Which is why we intentionally designed our interface to look like Excel. So if you've got a project management organization, just ask them to start doing this. Except they're doing it in a single place, which means that you get to aggregate the view and you get to see easily the combined impact of everybody that's asking for the same shared service, right? So you can start with PMs, you can start with the cross-functional resource managers, or your release train engineers, or your product owners, even if it's just one. Even if there's just one of you out here that says, what, I want to try this in my organization, because as soon as you do this, you know what you start to do? You can walk into the next room and say, these are how my people appear to be allocated for the next 6 to 12 months. And other people look at that and go, wow, uh, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to see, what my team looks like in that regard, right? You can
Yeah.
start it at a higher level portfolio, or the executives can start and push this down and say, look, let's go take a pilot organization here. Let's just take 2 or 3 resource managers, or just a couple of agile release trains if you're doing things in a safe perspective, or this organization development organization, right? Let's have them start to do a little bit more reliable cross-functional long-term planning, right? In a tool that provides visibility to everybody, so that when we start having resource arbitrations, we can do it with data and say, look, maybe our data is not perfect. Maybe we're only 80% accurate, which is typical for us. 80% accurate out 6 months. Oh, but that's well enough to start having the right conversations, right? So really, you can start almost anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. It's very much, like power to the people. Like if you are interested in this, start doing it and introduce it to the rest of the team. Love
Yeah,
that.
and it's very effective, right? Because and that's the thing, it immediately benefits. Like this is not like again putting in some long framework where it takes months or years sometimes to really see benefits. You get immediate benefit because you're clarifying your availability discussions for your
Yeah.
people and teams. By the way, you're also protecting your teams, right, and your people. Um,
Yeah.
so this becomes a way to really positively influence talent retention as well.
Love that. Okay, we have a question here. So regarding the slide on strategic alignment, how do you see the difference between a project and an epic?
Both of them are similar in this regard. You should be able to easily go out and whether it's a project or an epic, right? Let me just pop out here. Um, uh, and again, I'll just pull this up real quick. I believe this is actually an epic. We'll go to attributes, and you should have similar attributes out here, right? You should be able to have a strategic theme, tell what product or portfolio they're coming from. Is it an epic? I was right. It's an epic, right? Is it a proposal? Is this LPM authorized, meaning that it's above the financial threshold? You can put whatever criteria that you want out here. Look, I don't want to make this too complicated, but you should have a common taxonomy for the kinds of attributes that you are tracking, whether it's an epic or a project. And that's how you end up, again, because you're putting things on a common timeline. That's how
Mhm.
you end up here with your whole portfolio and the resources associated with them, whether they're epics or projects, on a common timeline as to how they're affecting the capacity commitments needed to deliver those capabilities.
Awesome. So to summarize, it's pretty much when it comes to, excuse me, when it comes to resource planning, an epic and a project are relatively the same thing. We know technicalities they're not, but we're still planning to that level because that is the level that it makes sense to. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, you start out at that level and then you decompose your work, right? Projects typically get decomposed into phases and then tasks. Agile epics typically get decomposed into epics and then stories, right? And so you want to be forecasting by team and role and refine your estimates as you go. But yes, they're very, very similar in that regard. Of course they are. And that's how people actually get work done, right? Project teams need agile teams
Hmm.
typically to help them with development efforts or whatever skill set that, they're delivering from an agile perspective. Could be data analytics, right? And vice versa. You have agile teams that need shared services. Look, I need people that are going to help me do my release planning, right? Do you have one of those on every team? If you do, bless you, right? This still works for that. But usually there are multiple elements within IT departments that are actually intended to be shared across delivery teams or organizations.
Awesome. All right. Potentially one more question, maybe two more. We'll see. So this question here, I'm going to assume what is being asked. So if the most needed resources in the organization are at a 90% allocation, like zero point 0.9 FTE, like they are assigned, 90%. Um, how does that make an impact to your ability to pivot to different requirement changes or changes in priority. I'm assuming this question means, if I assign my people and I know that things are going to change, is that going to hurt me to stay on track with the plan? Or should I be incorporating extra time into being able to make sure that they can pivot?
Well, you always need to be able to pivot. And the nice thing is, with this kind of data, even broadly as an organization, even if you're looking at doing a reduction in force or whatever, you ought to make broad decisions like that or micro decisions at a project or epic level, with good data, right? The best data that you have. And so, yes, if you've got people that are working at 100%, and they're committed at 100%, in theory, you've gone through a reasonable process to get them assigned to those. But if you have unexpected work come in that may be a higher priority, then you've got to pull them off, right? Or you've got to bring in contingent labor, which typically takes, 3 to 6 months to do, depending on, the nature of your business and if you've got a warm pool of resources offshore or whatever the case may be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's assume that you don't. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be planning your people. It just means that you need to be having the right discussions when the opportunity to pivot arrives. If you're here on sprint 3 in the middle of a quarterly, planning session and something big walks in the door and you need an architect for that, then you go have the discussion, right? But you're doing it with data, right? So you should be able to pivot intelligently, right? And that means you've got to understand what people are working on. And if you don't have this kind of view, that's painful. Man, it used to take me a week and a half to go figure out what everybody on this effort that I'm thinking about stopping is working on and the cascading impacts of that. You can just get that in 5 minutes. And all it takes is people to simply come in, size their work, and update their forecast once a month, or
Mm-hmm.
do it during their sprint iteration planning, right? This is not a heavy lift, but when you coordinate it through our software, now you open up this visibility, and so you can start to answer questions like that
Yeah.
quickly and effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. To sum that up, it's like, you do need to be planning your resources. They do need to be assigned to work. That's why you're planning. That's, why your organization exists. And at the same time, you also need to be having those conversations as those resources may need to be pulled off. And of course, as we know, Tempus is going to help you have that conversations. Like you said, it can be a week and a half or 5 minutes. If you're using Tempus, it's 5 minutes. And that's saving a lot of time, which we love. Okay, so last question for today, Lloyd, is so after the plan is set, we're reviewing this consistently, we're doing all the best practices. What information should I be reporting on to make sure my plan continues to align with the priorities?
Yeah. So again, your work. So you've actually backed into a really good point here. When you're looking at this from a capacity level, you're not just aligning your epics, your projects, your features with your priority. You're aligning your people, your skills to these priorities, right? When I
Yeah.
went out and looked at this by strategy and OKR, right, you get to see the projects out here, right? But it's also the people that are aligned and the spend associated with them that are aligned with your priorities. And that's particularly helpful for executive decision making. Um, and so, on an ongoing basis, what you want to be providing is information that's useful to help adapt quickly. So I say, look, you should be providing status just like you normally do. What's your percentage complete? Are you
Mhm.
keeping up with your value indicators? Meaning that, look, you're halfway through the development effort. You've put your minimum marketable feature out there, and it turned out to be a misfire, right? You're only getting 30% of the value you thought you should, right? That's important to know, because if I've got work to push and I'm only seeing 30% of the value come out of that, I should consider that, right? Frankly, either stopping it or
Mhm.
certainly putting it out as a candidate to, for delay, so to speak.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I think, common theme here, data is important, keeping your data up to date, having the conversation, it's a theme. It's a theme. And so I think that definitely helps. Um, all right. Well, Lloyd, I think we are done for the day. If anyone has a question, whether it's now and you didn't want to ask, or, in a couple of days when you're thinking about things, please send them to us. We would love to have the conversation, would love to sit down, schedule some time to talk through this, for your particular needs as well. Um, and I think we're good. Any last things from you, Lloyd?
No, I think that's it. I appreciate your time. It's not just something we're passionate about. I can tell you there's few things in life that benefit your enterprise as much as doing the right level of capacity planning. It benefits your enterprise, benefits your people. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Lloyd. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.